Close to the Tanzanian coast, you'll find a barely inhabited island. There are less than 1,000 people, not much infrastructure, and the inhabitants have to go to the mainland if they want any sort of services. What the island does have are remnants. Remnants of a wealthy and prosperous society which had seen major success. Success which was tragically jeopardized due to avoidable problems that nonetheless stuck with it for its entire existence. This is the story of Kilwa Kisiwani. Kilwa Kisiwani, not to be confused with other places called Kilwa, nor with the municipality that the city finds itself in, wouldn't seem unique at first glance. Sure, it's a pretty sweet stone town that was constructed on a small island centuries ago, but you'd be surprised how common that is on the Swahili coast. So why does this one receive special attention? Well, this one was once the economic center of the entire Swahili coast. Unfortunately for us, all we have are shards of a much greater story. A few buildings, a lot of coins, and a few written accounts, though those have very dubious reliability. Although when exactly people started living here is unclear, it's easy to see why they eventually did. Although Kilwa is an island today, it wasn't always. According to one of our written accounts, it was connected to the mainland by an isthmus which would appear during low tides. This is advantageous because it makes it easy to access the mainland while also being a more easily defendable position than simply being a coastal city. Other than that though, there isn't much to say. We only have archaeological evidence to work with, and it does tell us some things, but nothing extraordinary. Kilwa was a village where most of the people's dietary needs were met by fishing. Most of the buildings were made out of wood, and although some trade could be tied to this period, there isn't any evidence to suggest that they were necessarily profiting from it, only participating in it to a limited capacity. Then we get to the Chronicles, the only written accounts which attempt to make a comprehensible history of the town. The issue is that there are two, and both are contradictory in very specific ways. Also, both have a very clear bias which make both very unreliable. The Portuguese account was created when they were beginning their colonial exploits in the Indian Ocean, as well as terrorizing the Swahili coast, and the Omani account, which was written in Arabic, was commissioned by the Sultan of Oman. Well, depending on who you ask, it might be more accurate to call him the Sultan of Zanzibar, but that's a long story. The Arabic version is generally accepted as the more reliable one, but it has major flaws that we'll get to. Both at least seem to separate two different eras when it comes to the island's dynastic history. I'll refer to them as the Shirazi Dynasty and the Abu Mawahib Dynasty. The Shirazi Dynasty is the first as well as the least understood. Not only is there less information on them, but a lot of the information we do have is strange in both chronicles. The dynasty is said to have started when the Sultan, or Emir, of Shiraz in modern-day Iran, as well as his sons decided to leave Shiraz. The reason depends on which text you consult, but it's agreed that one of these sons, Ali bin al-Hassan, eventually landed in Kilwa and bought the island. This legend has been highly scrutinized for many reasons. The most convincing reason is that both chronicles were commissioned by foreign occupiers, so they probably had a reason to associate foreign rule with success. This is also the reason why this dynasty is known as the Shirazi Dynasty, whether or not you actually believe this legend. It's difficult to get clear pictures of Kilwa around this period, but what we do get are general themes. For example, it's explained that Ali bin al-Hassan sent one of his sons to be the ruler of what is probably the island of Mafia. Mafia is much bigger than Kilwa Kisiwani, so if the translation I used is correct, then that can be a little confusing. In fact, it's been speculated that during this time, Kilwa didn't become independent during the Shirazi dynasty, but simply changed rulership. This is just speculation. What it does confirm is that around this time, the island was nowhere near isolated, and in fact had political and dynastic relations with many other islands and towns in the area. There are also the conflicts with the Mata Mandalin. According to the chronicles, two of the Mata Mandalins successfully became sultans before being overthrown themselves. This dynasty should also be credited with introducing copper coinage to the town. The introduction of a coin with a cheap metal certainly helped in Kilwa's rise to economic prominence, though importantly it didn't actually cause this rise. According to the Portuguese chronicle, this rise mostly began after the 9th Sultan took control over the trade routes of Sofala from the city-state of Mogadishu. Kilwa definitely took this trade route from the Mogadishans at some point. The issue is that the Omani chronicle claims that this 9th Sultan doesn't even exist. In fact, they say that the 8th Sultan, who came to power when he was 70 years old, ruled for another 70 years. If we are to assume that the Portuguese version is correct, then Kilwa gains the trade route, but the Sultan doesn't spend the newly gained wealth, or the Sultan has a hard time harvesting wealth from it. This is because, according to Ibn Battuta, yes, that Ibn Battuta, by the time he visited Kilwa, the buildings were still mostly wood, and this was much later than the supposed reign of the 9th Sultan. If the Omani chronicle is to be believed, and you ignore the 140-year-old man, then the next Sultan is Al-Hassan bin Talut, the founder of the Abu Mawahib Dynasty. The Omani chronicle says that he took this position by force, but the Portuguese version says that he was simply related to the previous one by blood. At the very least, it's certainly agreed that this dynasty would see the peak of Kilwa's power, as well as Kilwa's fall, though we'll talk about that later. The reason that Sofala's trade routes were so important was because they were pretty much the only route by which the metal-rich Zambezi Basin let out large amounts of gold, copper, as well as things like ivory. These were all highly sought-after things in the Muslim world, and having exclusive access to this route allowed the sultans to charge massive customs and tariffs that merchants and rulers alike couldn't really do much about. But the bigger they are, the harder they fall. The most likely reason why Kilwa seems to have had trouble seeing the benefits of this trade route was the issue of succession. The rules of succession, as far as we can tell, were never truly clarified when it comes to the Kilwa Sultanate. Hell, even high-ranking officials with very dubious legitimacy vied for the throne, an action which the Omani Chronicle claims started a civil war. This is why Kilwa Kisiwani is an awesome story that is also somewhat tragic. An independent African sultanate which was able to take control over massive portions of the Swahili coast and build massive structures, but was unable to reap all the benefits due to internal strife. Some sultans ruled for years and were able to do amazing things like build the Great Palace or rebuild Kilwa's Great Mosque, but the reason it needed to be rebuilt was because the constant internal strife caused the mosque to fall into disrepair. The Kilwa Sultanate is an outstanding example of a society in sub-Saharan Africa finding success, but that success made it a prize that people fought hard to win, despite the consequences. As mentioned previously, what truly brought the downfall of Kilwa was a civil war caused by a succession crisis. This downfall was only cemented when the Portuguese arrived, but European colonization is outside the scope of this video, so I'll end it here. Please check out the other videos in this collaboration. Everyone who is participating makes great content, and sub-Saharan Africa is a region that is very interesting, and its history should be something that everyone should learn more about.